Well, while we're working on that, I first need to bring, as my husband and I discussed, greetings and apologies from the 30% of Oklahoma voters who did not vote for that unconstitutional. Okay, thank you. Supposedly state constitutional amendment to forbid Oklahoma judges from considering not only Sharia, but any international law. Okay. That is a heartfelt comment. Had to get that out there. If anybody wants to talk more about the history behind this sort of thing, including the way people used to talk about Roman Catholicism. It's also, I think, a really good but unfortunate example of how some people, especially when pushed for other people's political purposes, decide to deal with the issue of an increasingly diverse and complex world. I'll tell you, the oil companies and others that have a lot of business in countries where Sharia is a significant part of how they contract business are not thrilled. Okay. Even beyond the symbolic value, we are talking here about the practical value of what happens to our business. And the work that I have been doing with this project that I'm going to discuss with you and show you some pictures from has to do with basically pretty practical people involved in pretty practical issues, although a lot of us are what people would call eggheads, scholars. This is a multi-year project where you have from around the globe scholars, researchers, practitioners, officials in government who work in alternative dispute resolution, negotiation, mediation, arbitration. And one of the things that has happened over the last 15, 20 years is that there is a fairly standardized, Americanized, Western model of international commercial negotiation that has been exported all over the world, kind of like a cookie cutter. And although I have done a lot of work all over the world, it has not been that. And the work that I have done has been more oriented based upon the work we began in Oklahoma in tribal peacemaking with Native American tribes. It took 2 years for a delegation from the International Federation of Women Lawyers in Nigeria to convince me to come to Nigeria with that model. After, though, it took root, it thrived, it was incredible and moving. And then we were asked to bring it to Rwanda and to Liberia. And then I discovered it's actually gone to Afghanistan now too. Wow. And the point is that you can always find some kind of common ground, hopefully. You can always find some sort of common ground, some principles that people share that are not simply tied to their denomination, their tribal identity, their clan. There are some overarching things that bind all of us together. Problem is that the way that most people are taught this, we professors don't include that. We don't see the complexities. And so this next generation project is about trying to add complexity, and how do you do it? In our first volume, we talked about these issues more broadly, and I'll have just up here on the screen so you can see it if you want to. Some of the things that we are trying to do is how do you talk about culture? And I'm the one who said, what about soul? My very first time, it really was a joke, kind of, because I knew that they weren't going to take it seriously. It was, for me, very serious. I didn't think they would take it seriously. Bringing soul to international commercial negotiation. I said, and I'll change it, I'll change it. I know we need to change it, I know. They said, no, keep that. Okay, we'll keep it. And then there was finding identity, common identity in the soil of culture. But then there was this one that actually began years ago. It began in 2006 when I had the great honor, the great privilege of having our first trip to Turkey. And I had been thinking for some time, I wonder, is there a way of using our kind of tribal peacemaking methods to help include the common ground of ethical, caring, compassionate business people, the people who believe in stewardship, the people who believe in relationship, who believe in the long term and not just short-term profit? Isn't there a way to bring that to a principled approach to business negotiation so that the fundamental driving spirit and principles of Sharia can be honored without actually having to say the word? And at an IID luncheon in Ankara, I was so blessed to have been sitting beside a former Supreme Court justice for the nation of Turkey. And he said, yes, there is. I think that's a wonderful thing. And he started sending me things. He started sending me beautiful hadith. And he said, keep going. And so I did. And so we end up now with this project where in our second year, we met in Istanbul. And my husband, the professor of world religion, who's much bolder than I, said, both of us agreed, people who are teaching this need to have the experience of community of business people, people who see their world as more than just a balance sheet, as we experienced in Istanbul. And then we thought, well, have they ever spoken with businessmen who are Muslim? No, probably not, except the ones from the Philippines, and yeah. So, well, I wonder how we might arrange that. And my husband said, well, why don't we ask Orhan? Dr. Orhan Osman, the director of the Turkish Raindrop House in Oklahoma City. And I said, oh, it's just too late. And he said, no, let's just drive on by there and let's just stop and ask. And within 72 hours, it was all arranged. And I would just like here to say, thank you. Thank you. Some of the things that will not show in the paper are the emotional transformation that happened with many of our participants. There were 24 of us, primarily scholars, professors, researchers. And it was a very wide range of people, mostly atheists, agnostics, people who don't bother to think about God or religion at all, lapsed Catholics, current and embittered Protestants, some Zen practitioners, everything you could possibly name, but mostly people who never, ever, ever talk about or think about religion, especially in the context of their work. And you're also talking about people who are trained and their last 30 years or so of their life experience has been hard. That's, everything's about money. Don't believe somebody when they say, we've reached impasse because it's a matter of principle. No, it's really a matter of money. That's what we're taught. And people have believed it. There's a key question here. Is it possible in the rough and tumble of the business world to actually try to assume that maybe sometimes when people say it's about principle, that they mean it? Basically, nobody in this group of 24 people ever believed that that was true. Excuse me, once they grew up, as far as they were concerned, and went out in the world, they did not believe it was true, and therefore they never taught it as being true. Now, so faith and folly, that was kind of the division that I came up with. The idea that is it folly to even think that somebody would follow faith principles in the way that they conduct business, the way they handle money? Or are they just hypocrites about it? Surely they don't really mean it, even if they say it, some of the discussion that we had last night. Well, we were fortunate to be able to meet with the Confederation of Turkish Businessmen, and I went back again a few months later and met some more and did some follow-up questions just to make sure that I was clear and not getting too narrow a picture of it. And what we came up with was, underlying it all, yes, we will try to work in good faith according to our values. We'll also kind of feel out the other side to see if they're in accordance with it. If they're not, we'll switch. Okay? And it comes down to trust God, but tie your camel. It was kind of good to hear, yes, we will negotiate in good faith, but there is a time to call in the lawyers and write everything down. Because sometimes you just can't trust people's honor, especially if you happen to be doing things like construction work or mining work, et cetera, in the former Soviet Union. Okay. It was a very personal journey for many people because of, and I must admit I had completely forgotten or not noticed that many people in our westernized American group were not immigrants, or their immigrant story was sufficiently far back that it wasn't part of their narrative or the way they saw themselves anymore, so they didn't quite get that idea of people having multiple identities but still being themselves. It was a very hard sell to get people to understand that just because somebody is dressed in Tommy Hilfiger or Brooks Brothers or whatever, just because they went to the Ivy League schools, that doesn't mean that they have accepted all of your same Western material values. There's this tendency to assume that if you look modern, if you are engaged in a modern business, then you also must care only about money. That was a tremendous gulf that we had to breach. And for some people, it was the lesson of a lifetime. It helped them to re-identify missing parts of themselves. These are some of my different parts of myself. And in business, it also required us to take another look at and respect the traditions of Islam and commerce that go back a lot farther than the Uniform Commercial Code in the United States or the World Trade Organization or the European Union. These are pages from a wonderful book that we found in the Bazaar. And of course, you know, credit card, fine, yes, if you'll take the credit card, I gotta have it, gotta have it, gotta have it, and I'm so happy I did. Because we see here from the Ottoman Empire, circa 17th century, yeah. No, this was the early 18th century, excuse me. We have Christian businessmen on the left-hand side and Muslim businessmen on the right-hand side. And the text on the other page explains what they are talking about. They are complaining about the same thing that business people complain about all the time, taxes and government regulation. It's driving me crazy. That's common ground. I also wanted to make sure the next time I had done this talk to show there has been a long, long, long tradition of arbitration to assure fairness. So even if you're not so sure that a person is really going to be trustworthy and all those good and soft and wonderful things, guess what? There's arbitration to back it up. And it's been this way for hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years. It's a part of the fiber of the way things are done. But then there are also those customs that you're not going to find written down as a part of taxes or regulation or arbitration. And it is something that our HIZMET movement business people helped us with so much. And that was having the courage and the trust in us to articulate, to say out loud the content of the business customs. And those customs, the ritual of hospitality, it was overwhelming. It was like a tsunami for so many of our participants in this experiment, in this dialogue. They didn't get it, some of them. Others were, very, very suspicious. Especially the people who believe that you can negotiate, you can tell if somebody is lying by whether their pupils are dilating, sort of thing. No, seriously. We have these people that are really into the science of measuring trust. We also have heavy-duty labor management folks who have been fighting, steel workers and stuff like that for their entire existence, with tears in his eyes as he talked about what it was like to talk with these business people who actually cared about their employees. And then we had, so there are very different things about negotiation, mostly in my paper, but I called them the 3 T's. Tempo, that the pace of everything is much slower. Tea, the 3 cups of tea. Had to explain that. And trust. that all of those are building towards trust so that you have some comprehension of whether this is a person that you want to and can handle having a long-term business relationship with. Would one of our Turkish friends translate for us? Hakan? Yes?
When you laugh, those who are with you are laughing together. When you cry alone.
Yes. Yes.
Öyle bir ağaca yaslan ki asla yıkılmasın. That's why lean on a tree that is not going to be disturbed. Öyle bir dost edin ki seni asla yarı yolda bırakmasın. Take a friend that is never leave you alone on the road.
Thank you. This was chosen by the employees as like the thought of the week for the business where we visited, Guzela. Mr. Guzel treats his employees like family. He doesn't call them employees, he calls them friend. He has 400-something employees. He doesn't bother with keys to his office. They all have keys to his office because he trusts them. He eats when they eat. He eats what they eat. And his beautiful daughter from Theta University. Oh my gosh, just lovely. We had a fantastic time. And as we continued talking, we realized that both of these gentlemen, Chris Honeyman and Jim Coben, from very different backgrounds, had family experiences in real estate and in the garment industry in England, Paris, and in New York. Very tough businesses. And the more they talked, the more they realized, oh, this is the way my uncle used to do business and has never been sued. Now, I just wanted to run through some examples of what the Gulen kind of trip looks like sometimes from the perspective of scholars with a little bit of commentary in there. We did some hands-on application of negotiation, and it blew people's mind. It took weeks, I think, for them to put it back together again. We started off at the Spice Bazaar, of course, and the assignment was to negotiate and bargain to buy our lunch for that day. I had to include this one because I'm always drawn by lamps, and as I was putting together the slideshow this time, I was thinking, oh yes, the light of the eternal source shining from within all of us. It's all the same light. It's just that we have different colors and, you know, different glass, but it's all beautiful. So a lot of us don't shop like this in the United States. Okay, this is new. We also don't try to negotiate with a man who's wielding a very sharp knife. And his mind is much sharper than the scholars that he's negotiating with. Okay. Our Turkish translator guides found themselves sometimes in a bit of an ethical dilemma because they had to translate not only the words, but they had to translate culture and expectations. Okay? God bless them. But all of it worked. It wasn't all put together at the time, but professors, I guess you can recognize these sorts of things where you start putting all these ideas up on the wall, including ideas from former papers, and people start just adding their words to it based upon what they had been seeing and hearing. And there was so much hubbub in the room. It was fabulous. This young woman is from Israel and does negotiations for water with Palestinians. And lots of discussions, ending eventually in some smiles. Lots of smiles. Our field assignment, find something that represented both the sacred and the secular. The minaret and Mickey D. Yes, what better? We loved it. Is there hope? Does this matter? Yes, it absolutely does. When I look at the poetry, the wisdom, the philosophy, that even if it's just slow but constant, deliberate progress, it matters. And it may seem as if what the HIZMET movement is doing is just a little stream. But that's also the way the Grand Canyon was cut. Thank you very much.